Hi, my name is Mr. Anderson, and I am mean to people on the internet. I'm always polite about it, though. I just tend to ask difficult questions and insist on the answers. This shouldn't be a big surprise because I'm a lawyer. On my channel, you'll find a lot of stuff to do with debate. You can think of my channel as kind of like a self-defense course for getting into fights on the internet. And today we are going to talk about something that is the favorite of many people who do a lot of debate in the young Earth creationist world, which is kind of an old stomping ground of mine, and it is something called the heat problem.
Mr. Anderson.
So first, just a little bit of background if you're new to the channel. What I do typically is I ask a lot of questions. I use a lot of the techniques that I've honed in the legal world to make people who are kind of reluctant or difficult answer questions and face the truth. One of my favorite foils is young Earth creationism, because although we know that those things aren't true, the people who are proponents of those ideas are often good at rhetoric, good at debating, good at sort of slipping away and frustrating people who have the science on their side. So one of the things that I like to do is to show people, especially people who know the science far better than I do, how some of the techniques that I use can be employed to make sure that those strong points from science actually land. Now, young Earth creationism is basically the belief that the Earth is only about 6,000 years old and that it was created by God back then in pretty much its present form. They also believe that, generally they believe the Bible is literally true, so that's why God literally created the Earth in 7 days, or 6 days I should say, because he rested on the seventh day. And they also believe that Noah's flood is true. And that creates a whole host of problems. I could go through them, but there's somebody who has done that far better than I could, and I'm going to defer to her. It's a very popular YouTuber by the name of Gutsick Gibbon. So here's a rundown of Noah and the Flood by Gutsick Gibbon.
So creationists want to suppose that Noah's Ark and Noah's flood is responsible for the entirety of the geologic column. And depending on the creationist you're talking to, it might be 4.5 billion years worth of the geologic column, or just 500 million years worth of the geologic column, the latter spanning from the Cambrian to the Cretaceous, or potentially even into the Cenozoic, which would boost it to like 550 million years worth of just events. And when I say events, I mean every impact event, every mass extinction, all of the radioactive decay, all of the rock formation, the movement of the continents from supercontinent to separate continents and back again, all of that has to be explained during the year-long event of Noah's flood, because that is the event that is supposed to be responsible for the geologic column and thus everything recorded within it. They do this so they can basically say that what appears to be just a ton of time is actually a very small amount of time and just a very catastrophic event. They're trying to cram 4.5 billion to 500 million years worth of processes into a single year. Obviously, this entire scenario runs contra to the very ancient age of the Earth and an actualistic perspective provided by conventional science, which states that the Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old.
Okay, so now the important part of all this from our perspective is that there is a belief that when God broke the world and caused the flood in the days of Noah, there was one continent, and that the continents moved during that period of time from their original location to where they are now, because of course they still accept general idea of continental drift and plate tectonics. Their twist on it, though, is what they call catastrophic plate tectonics, or CPT. That is, they say that the plates moved through the same mechanisms and in the same directions and in the same manners as conventional science says. They just did all of that moving in 1 year. So the best example of this is actually the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So there's like a seam if you look at like a map of the world, um, that shows like elevations, including the elevations in the ocean. You'll see that there's like this spot right down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that goes kind of like from from the Arctic to the Antarctic. That where plates are diverging today, right? Like that's a spot where the Africa and Europe are going to the east, and like North America and South America are going to the west. And new plate is being created along that seam. So like the entirety of the Atlantic Ocean is new from the days of Noah, according to young Earth creationists, which means that all of the crust, which is at the bottom of the entirety of the Atlantic Ocean, plus like a whole bunch more in like other places in the world, but like let's just, we're going to take that as an example, right? All of that crust that was created, like must have been created as magma that hardened back into rock to form the bottom of the ocean. And so, and we know that it is rock now. We know that it's solid crust now. And so where did all the heat go then? Because if you dump all of that heat into the ocean, you're going to boil it and kill everything. All the fish will be dead. All the land creatures will be dead because the ocean boiled off. And so that is just one heat problem, right? There is another larger heat problem called the radiometric decay heat problem, which has to do with the radioactive decay of all of the elements that decay radioactively, which are, in the crust of the Earth, which they say formed during this 1 year. And you know what? I'll let Gutsick Gibbon explain it. Here, let's look at her clip.
This is done using radiometric dating, and an interesting little tidbit about this is that most young Earth creationists, and indeed the ones that work for like Answers in Genesis and the like, will agree that the radiometric dates that we pull from a lot of these rock samples do appear to be legitimate indicators of radioactive decay, and this is important. All radiometric dating is an appeal to very basic laws in physics, more specifically the radioactive decay law. It works a little something like this. You take a sample of rock, and in that rock you are going to have elements, and specifically radioactive isotopes. Some of these isotopes are extremely stable, and some of them are not stable at all. And unstable radioactive isotopes will spontaneously decay into a more stable daughter product at a known rate. The amount of time that it takes for half of the amount of that parent material to decay into its daughter product is its known half-life. And we know half-lives are consistent and constant because we have tested this over and over and over again in the lab and using observation in natural environments. So let's say we have a rock formed with uranium-238 in it. Uranium-238 is unstable and will decay into lead-206 after 4.5 billion years. If you were present at the formation of this rock example, and then you waited 4.5 billion years and came back, it would be half uranium-238 and half lead-206. If you would come back another 4.5 billion years later, half of that remaining uranium-238 will have decayed into lead-206, and so on and so forth. So what we can do then is look at any rock and look at the ratio of parent to daughter radioactive isotopes of known decay chains, and then take that back in time to see when the rock actually formed. This is called absolute dating, and it is extremely useful to us in the modern era because we use it to find fossil fuels in a process called basin modeling. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, that's great that we know how old the Earth is, but like, what does this have to do with the heat problem? Everything. Because when radioisotopes decay, they release heat. Not that much, but they release a little bit of heat every time this decay actually occurs, regardless of the series that we're looking at. Every year, we can actually measure the amount of heat that is put off, like due to this decay, like across the Earth or in isolation in labs for specific elements, specific decay chains, what have you. That's not a problem for conventional science because it's only a little bit every year. Well, what happens if you take 4.5 billion years worth of decay, or just 500 million years worth of decay, like the heat from that decay, and cram it into a single year. You get the vaporization of the granitic crust of the Earth several dozen times over, something that I hope I don't need to tell you a wooden boat would not survive. To put this into actual numbers, joules if you will, this is 1.86 times 10 raised 29 joules for 500 million years worth of decay. This is the equivalent of setting off 44 hydrogen bombs in every cubic kilometer of the planet. And if we up it to 4.5 billion years, it's 1.68 times 10 raised 30 joules. 402 hydrogen bombs for every cubic kilometer. For the record, to boil the oceans, you need 5.6 times 10 raised 26 joules of energy, and to vaporize it completely, you need 3.7 times 10 raised 27 joules. So that's just the nuclear decay. You can add things like the lithification of limestone, the hardening of all of the magma that we have to explain in the geologic column, all of the impact events, and the friction of the continents as they go from Pangaea to the current positioning, or Rodinia to separating out and then Pangaea to current positioning. Like, none of this works. It's an obscene amount of heat. What's interesting is that a lot of those numbers come from young Earth creationists who are basically saying, we have a problem. And kudos to them for admitting it, right? Answers in Genesis has an entire thermal problems with the Genesis Flood series where they go through each of these major sources of heat and are like, we're working on it. We're trying to make it work. But it's probably going to end up being miraculous. The miracles door has been propped open for young Earth creationists to solve their heat problem / radiometric dates problem for quite some time, like since the rate team, but that has been held up to present. The vast majority of the professionals are putting their hands up and saying, either we don't know what we're going to do, or the solution is probably going to be miraculous, or sometimes they'll appeal to like future physics that will be discovered, which like, okay, but that's at present miraculous. That's a miraculous appeal. I think the game is over the second you admit that, because you're no longer talking about science, you're talking about like just flat out creationism, right? Like, you can appeal to miracles all day long, but your idea is no longer even in the ball court, even in the same like tri-state area as science or scientific investigation, and your attempts at justifying young Earth creationism using science are like officially taken behind the barn and shot.
So Erica focuses quite a bit on the heat problem associated with radiometric decay because like it's a really big one, and it produces so much heat that like it doesn't just boil the oceans, it boils like the granite of the, like it boils the crust of the Earth, right? We're not even going to be talking about that heat problem. We're talking about a smaller heat problem, which is still preclusionary to young Earth creationism, which is just the hardening of all of the magma on all of the seafloors that must have been created during that year-long flood. So that's the CPT heat, the catastrophic plate tectonics heat, which, well, that isn't enough to boil the crust of the Earth, is enough to boil the oceans, more than boil the oceans, which we shall see. So what's going on here, and the reason that I'm going through all of this with you guys, is there's this YouTube channel called Standing for Truth. And it's kind of like, it's a young Earth creationist, channel. And they have been trying to solve the heat problem for years. It's kind of weird because, even the professional young Earth creationist organizations have admitted that it's not currently solvable, but they figure they can do it anyways. It's just this guy Donnie and his friends, but they keep saying that they can do it. And this guy David came along and emailed Donnie and said, "Hey, I think I've solved the heat problem." And Donnie was like, "That's amazing!" And he brought him on his channel and told everybody. And so Gutsick Gibbon was there, and which is Erica, and Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal was there, and all these people came to see like what it is that Donnie figured that he had. And I showed up, and I decided that I would kind of do my thing and ask this guy David some questions about his model where he says that he's solved the heat problem. So he gave his presentation, which unfortunately I was not able to catch, but I had read the abstract of this paper or presentation that he had submitted to some organization or another. So I kind of knew where he was coming from in general. And so I had, some ideas prepared about what what might be going on here, and how his argument might be problematic. And that, in essence, is what we're going to be going through here today. Is my discussion with this fellow David about his supposed solution to the heat problem that has to do with CPT. So here we go.
Mr. Anderson, precedents, our first critic here for tonight. So far, Brian T. Rock, excellent questions. I appreciate the input. And so, Mr. Anderson, we can always count on him to join and engage in some meaningful dialogue. So, Mr. Anderson, just make sure to unmute yourself. A couple questions. How you doing? Brief introduction. What would you like to chat about?
Yeah, my I go by Mr. Anderson on YouTube. I'm I suppose I'm a critic of Donnie's, essentially. I don't know. I got my start debating Dr. Kent Hovind, and now I've moved on, I guess, to Mr. Donnie. Sorry, Mr. David Winsberg. And David, so I read the abstracts to your paper, and I've caught bits and pieces of the debate. I'm sorry that or your presentation. I'm sorry that this is a habit that I'm going to try not to get into, but I wasn't able to listen to the entire thing. So I just want to make sure that I've got my facts straight so that I don't mischaracterize you. Is that all right?
Okay.
So my understanding is that you are of the view that the heat problem can be mitigated by virtue of essentially just releasing the heat more slowly over the course of years, maybe even hundreds or thousands of years after the event, and basically storing it in the mantle in the meantime. Is that accurate?
Storing it in the crust or wherever it was deposited. Yes, it can be. It would take a long time for it to dissipate.
Okay, in the crust, not the mantle.
Yes, wherever it was deposited. It would take a long time for it to get out.
Wherever the heat was deposited.
Right.
Okay, and your focus here is not on the accelerated nuclear decay heat. It is more strictly with respect to the heat that's generated by catastrophic plate tectonics. Is that right?
Yes, and I also provided calculations that accelerated nuclear decay doesn't work because it's going to be problematic from a heat perspective.
So I have no idea why he felt the need to throw that in there when he was talking to me. I mean, I imagine that the reason that he talked about accelerated nuclear decay at all is because Donnie asked him to, because of course Erica Gutsick-Gibbon was there and accelerated nuclear decay, and that specific aspect of the heat problem is kind of like, it's her thing. It's something that she didn't invent it, but she popularized it, and it's kind of her bread and butter. And you know, if they don't talk about that, then she's going to be disappointed, and she's going to be on Donnie's case. So that's probably why he was talking about it with her. But as to why he's talking about it with me, like at the time, I didn't understand. So what I did there is I went, okay, well, why are you bringing it up? Because if you're bringing it up because it is going to affect the things that we're going to talk about in terms of CPT, then I need to know about it. So the little sort of red flags go up in my brain, and I go, okay, well, this sounds like it might be different from what I'm expecting. So I need to drill down, and I need to figure out what's going on, right? So I started asking questions.
You were saying that the accelerated nuclear decay doesn't work, as in you don't think that it happened?
No, accelerated nuclear decay has a heat problem. That's a valid point.
No, well, I mean, I think we're all aware of that. But you're saying that that there's a calculation that makes it not a heat problem?
No. Okay, let me rephrase it.
So you can see what I'm doing here is when I'm talking to these guys, like I'm always listening, I'm always adjusting. And so, whereas before I'd gone, oh, okay, so this sounds like, this might be problematic and this might be something interesting. And I'm getting kind of a very strange answer. And it seems like it is still very disconnected from what we were going to talk about. And if it's something that's disconnected from what I want to talk about, and I don't know where it's going, and I don't know kind of like what is going on, then like sometimes you don't want to touch it, right? Um, and so I make the decision here. Okay, we're going to switch gears again. You know what? I just want to talk about the thing that I want to talk about, which is the CPT stuff, because there, I know where I'm going, and I can kind of drive the bus, right? So I kind of knock it on its head, and I'm like, look, that wasn't in your abstract. It doesn't really sound like you're making a lot of sense now. You don't have a clear, articulable point that seems to be connected to that other stuff. So, it looks like you were just doing a tangent. I don't want to go down a tangent. I want to talk about CPT. So knock this on the head. Let's get back to business.
Accelerated.
You know what?
nuclear
Let's put a
gas
pin
and
in that
heat
one because
problem.
I don't want to get off track. Because that certainly wasn't in your
Mr.
abstract.
Anderson, we'll let David respond anyway, and then if you want to respond again, you can, or move on. But we're gonna let him respond. Go ahead, David.
So who's this guy, right? Well, this is Sam. Sam, aka Redefine Living, or Sam Redefine Living. Sam is, I don't know how to describe Sam other than to say he's an interesting fellow who is kind of a contrarian, and for some reason Donnie has asked him to help moderate here, and he's not a useful addition. Now you can see here what he's done is essentially he's seen that I have said, hey, you know what? Actually, I don't want to go down that road. And his response is immediately, no, we're going to go down that road. Like, just, for sure, we're going to go down that road. Just because he likes to try and derail things. And Sam is going to, on a number of occasions throughout this, try and derail things. And what I'm doing to sort of control him and make sure that he doesn't interfere more than he, I'm trying to let him interfere as little as possible with this discussion. Is I'm treating him the same way that I would treat an objecting lawyer who's objecting improperly. And so you'll see here, how I shut him down, and then I'll pop back in and we'll talk about sort of the details of what I'm doing and how and why.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. We kind of got off track. I was trying to clarify everything. But I agree with what you were saying. And I just wanted to clarify my position on accelerated nuclear decay.
Real quick, he might not
You know
be
what,
aware that
Sam? I think I only have a limited amount of time here, so
that's fine.
if you wouldn't mind, if we need
hold
you,
on,
I will certainly
Anderson.
let you know.
Yeah, Mr. Anderson, 1 second. You might have missed that there are different models, and not all models accept the accelerated nuclear decay.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Okay, so David.
So what I'm doing here is I'm just reminding Sam that he's not part of this conversation, that I'm not talking to him, and that I'm not interested in what he has to say. So especially when he brings up a new point or a point of his own, like, I don't care. I don't care at all because I'm not talking to him. And that's the same thing is true when you're talking to a witness in, cross-examination. Sometimes the lawyer will go in and try and answer for the witness, and I'll say to the lawyer, look, I'm not interested in your answer. I'm interested in his answer. You're not the witness. He is. Right? So if you have an objection, object. Otherwise, shut up, sit down, and enjoy the ride. And essentially, that's kind of what we're doing here with Sam, is we're saying, look, if you need to give some moderation, then I guess do it, right? Otherwise, you are not involved in this conversation. So, thank you for that contribution. I'm not going to respond to it. I'm not interested in it. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to this guy.
Let's focus on the part the thing that you really care about then, which is the heat with respect to catastrophic plate tectonics, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And how much heat does or do you think the catastrophic plate tectonics generated?
It depends on the model of catastrophic.
Okay, your model.
I don't have a favorite model. I don't really know.
Okay, what's the amount, your least favorite model? What's the worst case scenario?
All right, so now we're into it. Now I'm talking to this David fellow, and I'm just trying to ask him, okay, so, look, what model of CPT are we talking about? How much heat are we talking about? Because, he's talking about heat dissipation model, and I'm going, right, okay, so, how much heat then are you dissipating? And he goes, oh, well, and you can see he's being very cagey here because he knows that his model does not dissipate a sufficient amount of heat. And, that's going to become painfully clear later on. But Right now, I'm just laying groundwork, right? Like, I don't necessarily, I have an inkling that this is a problem, but he hasn't said it yet. And so that isn't out in the open. So I need to drag that out first, right? So it's like, okay, well, so how much heat are we talking about? How much energy are you saying needs to be dissipated in the first place? And you can see him running, and he goes, well, I don't have a model, and there are many models. I don't have a favorite model. And so my response is, right, okay, well, then, I'm not asking you about your favorite model. Let's talk about your least favorite model. What's the worst case scenario, right? And essentially what you're doing here when he tries to dodge in the one direction is you just go to the other extreme, right? If he'd have said, well, I'm not sure what the worst case scenario is, you just, well, what's the best case scenario, right? I just want to bound him. I want the range. So it's just kind of a simple way to kind of say, like, well, I want to know the range, right? I'm not asking you to pin yourself down to a particular number. What's the low side? What's the high side, right? We need to know what we're talking about.
Okay. This is a good question, and I'm not trying to be evasive here, but the reason I can't give you a number is because I'm more focused on how much heat could be removed and what would the implications of that be. All right, so let me put it to you in a
Okay, well, give it to me in terms of an order of magnitude, because I don't really need the decimal places. So something times 10 to the what?
Sure. Okay.
Now, I mean, if you're watching this video, you're probably a little bit science-minded. But for those of you who kind of maybe, are interested in science and interested in debate and all those sorts of things, but it's been a while since, you were in high school and you haven't really touched things like scientific notation in a while. What we're talking about here, when we talk about orders of magnitude, is like the number of zeros after a number, right? So like, you know how it is where like, you write a 1 and like that's not that many, but you add like a couple of zeros and now it's 100, right? Each zero is an order of magnitude, right? So I'm like, look, I don't need the number. I just want to know how many zeros we're talking about here, right? So when we say blah 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 times 10 to the, it's the times 10 to the, and then the number after to the is the number that I care about, right? Because that's just the number of zeros after whatever the first number is. So if it's a 5, fine. If it's a 9, I don't care, right? I just want to know how many zeros am I writing after that number. And in this case, we're talking about like over 20, right? at least. And you'll see we're talking about like, oh, is it 26? Is it 27? Is it 28? That's how many zeros go after the number, whether it's 5 or 2 or 1 or 8 or whatever, right? So, we're talking about, more than billions, more than trillions by a lot, right? And that's why we're talking about temperatures that can boil oceans and melt rock and vaporize rock across an entire planet, is because we're talking about things that have this many zeros. And remember, when you add like, the difference between, 10 to the 28 and 10 to the 29 is like, it's a lot, right? It doesn't take a lot more zeros for things to kind of really get out of control. I'll give you guys a good example. So like a million seconds is about 12 days. A billion seconds is 31 years, 8 months. So like those 3 zeros are everything, right? And another way to think of it is like when we get into, the thing is that when you add an extra zero as the numbers get bigger, that extra zero has a greater and greater effect. So like the difference between 1 and 100, you're like, oh, if I had $1, like that's nice. If I had $100, like, no, that's okay. But like when you take, the same sort of thing, like the difference between $10,000 and $1 million is the same, right? So you can imagine that kind of a jump, like that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. And as the numbers get bigger, like the increase of 1 0, like it has that proportionately greater and greater effect. That's kind of the reason that's the reason why this number, this exponent number, the times 10 to the blank number, matters so much here. And so that's why I'm like, look, I just want to know the order of magnitude, because, that's enough precision. And then the other reason that I'm doing this is that, like, when he's like, well, I don't really have the exact numbers, and I'm like, right. So, I just care about, like, within a factor of like 10 or 100 or 1,000, like, you should be able to give it to me, like, are we 1/1000th of the way there? Are we 1/10th of the way there? Like, I'm not asking you for precision here, but you should have, a level of precision that is that exact, because that's really not very exact. And so this is sort of an aspect of, like, when you're pinning somebody down, when you ask questions that are reasonable, then it's much more difficult for them to try and evade them, because when they try and evade reasonable questions, they look unreasonable, right? And so it's a really great way to force people to answer questions and to face the truth, is you ask fair questions, and you ask a series of fair questions. And that's actually something that really kind of distinguishes me from a fellow like, say, Darth Dawkins, for example, who also likes to ask questions, but they're always like loaded questions, and they're kind of unfair. And then he'll, like, you're not answering the question. And he doesn't really ever get anywhere. All he does, like, at best, is sort of make people look, sometimes he can make people look evasive because they refuse to answer his question. But, like, then the objection is always just like, you weren't asking a fair question, so of course he didn't answer it. And so it doesn't really kind of get you very far. It does get you somewhere, but not very far, not nearly as far as if the person is trying to be evasive and the question is a simple one and a straightforward one, like, you say you can dissipate the heat so that the earth doesn't melt. How much are you dissipating, right? How much do you need to dissipate? Where the question is, it's one where, like, if you try and evade that one, then, I mean, which one of us looks unreasonable, right? So, I mean, it's a small point, but it's a big point. It's an important thing, is that you phrase your questions in a reasonable way, you ask reasonable questions, and all of those little reasonable questions build to the point that they don't want to touch.
So the climate can handle post-flood, and we're not talking about pre-flood, post-flood can handle roughly 10 to the 27 joules. That's what the climate can handle. So if a catastrophic plate tectonics model requires that more than that heat was generated and dumped into the oceans, then that needs to be revised in order to match what can be dissipated by climate post-flood.
So you think that you can dissipate 1 times 10 to the 27th joules of heat?
I don't think you can dissipate much more than that in order to
Okay, but you do think that you can dissipate that much?
It might not even be that much depending upon climate modeling.
Okay, but you think, so how much is it?
Okay. So if that's, let me rephrase this in a way that 10 to the 27 joules is enough heat to heat the entire volume of the oceans by 180 degrees centigrade if it's deposited instantaneously and not over a long period of time. I don't.
Yeah, 1 times 10 to the 24th is enough to boil the ocean.
No,
so 1 times 10 to the 27th would be
No, that's
definitely
wrong.
enough to boil the ocean, right?
No, that's wrong. 1 times 10 to the 24th is not enough to joules. We're talking about joules here. It's not enough energy to it'll increase the ocean temperature by less than a degree.
By less than a degree.
Yes, for 10 to the 24th.
Can we round that to a degree?
No, it's actually 0.18 degrees. The heat capacity. Okay, if you take the mass of the entire.
So how much heat? How many, in just round it to the nearest order of magnitude? You said it would do. So you're saying 1 time, because that 1 times 10 to the 24th. I got that from you. I got that from your. Abstract.
Yeah. So in his paper, he talks about something like 700 times 1 times 10 to the 24th, which is a weird way of doing this, because, like I told you before, I'm really only caring about the orders of magnitude. So I was going from memory here, and I was recalling that it was 1 times 10 to the 24th, not realizing, because I just went back and looked, that he used a very strange way of putting this. He used 700 times times 10 to the 24th, which really should be 7 times 10 to the 26th, right? Because you're just supposed to use the number of like zeros, right? I just want to know the number of zeros. Anyway, so that's where that kind of came from. But it's neither here nor there, really.
I see the problem. Okay, so 10 to the 24th, that's 1 yottajoule. I'm always using 10 to the 24th. Like I wouldn't use 10 to the 27. I would say 1,000 yottajoules. 1 yottajoule is 10 to the 24th, because I try to keep things consistent, because it's easy when you're using exponents to make a mistake or something. And so I try to just work in yottajoules. I apologize if that's confusing people.
Yeah, sure. It's confusing the heck out of me. Let's just use joules.
So he's doing this in this weird way that's wrong, and it doesn't matter, right? That's not the point. The point is just that I want it to be done in the normal way. So, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt as to whether or not I'm the one who's confused or he's the one who's confused, and I'm just going to say, look, let's just do this in the standard way that everybody always does this. We're going to use joules, and then we're going to use scientific notation where you just have a number that is less than 10 times 10 to the, and then you give a number which is the number of zeros you're going to write after it. And so, I'm trying to just really, what I care about here is, all right, well, how much energy does it take to boil the ocean then? If it's not 10 to the 24, then what is it, right? And I want that number, and I want it from him. Number one, because I don't know it off the top of my head. Number two, because then he's going to be tied to it. And he does have it. So let's just see how we drill down there.
Okay.
So 1 times 10 to the 24th joules will boil the ocean, right?
No.
No, 1 times 10 to the 24th yattajoules will boil the ocean. That's what you're saying.
Okay. I'm going to just give you my, share my screen and give you my slide.
How many joules does it take to boil the oceans?
Hold on a second here.
Yes, if you'd like to share
did
screen, David.
Did you cover this in your? Didn't you cover this in your presentation, David?
Doesn't matter, Sam, because if you did, I missed it. So just tell me again.
See, this is another example of Sam trying to derail things, and look, I'm asking him, a straightforward question, and whether I had seen all of his presentation or I hadn't seen all of his presentation, neither of those things matter, right? Because I'm asking him a question. And the mere fact that he has told me once before, it doesn't matter, right? I can ask the same question again, especially if I don't remember the answer, or like the answer wasn't clear. Like, as we would say in law, like asked and answered is not a valid objection, right? Unless it's abusive, right? Like if I asked him the same question 100 times and he gave me the answer and I just kept asking it, like then you can say, look, you got your answer. But here, like, nobody seems to know what the answer is. So, for him to say like, well, you didn't catch it when it was in his presentation, so you don't get that information now, is stupid. So that's why I'm just like, look, Sam, it doesn't matter if he told me before. Tell me now.
Okay, can you see my screen, the slide I got up?
Yeah, hold on real quick. Mr. Anderson, you realized I was asked to join the stream to help mod, and if you're going to be uncharitable because you're pressed for time, perhaps you ought to consider coming back when you have more time. So
well, I appreciate your input, Sam, but it's not necessary. Thank you,
Mr. Anderson. Calm down. So we're gonna be patient with each other and not so demanding. Okay, David's taking his time to put together this nice presentation, and you didn't watch any of it, so he's going to be redundant. So you're going to be patient. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam. Go ahead, David.
So you saw there the conversation was moving on because David had found the relevant slide, and then Sam decided to take that opportunity to try and stir the pot a little bit, right? And he is definitely trying to bait me here, and this is kind of classic Sam. And so you'll notice that there's like these little pauses where he'll say like, calm down, and then he'll like just pause because like that's a trap, right? Where he'll say, calm down and pause, because the natural response is for somebody to say like, I am calm, you're the one who's blah, 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 blah. And It's like, no, then he can go into, oh no, you're clearly not calm, right? And you need to be calmer because I am, the grand poobah of what is called, like, he's deliberately trying to rile you up. Like, nothing gets people madder in general than telling them to calm down, right? It works about as well as baptizing a cat, and he knows that. And he's trying to, he's trying to rile me up, right? So he's like, calm down. And I say what? I say nothing, right? And so he kind of shoots his shot. And so then he tries to double down, we're going to be patient with each other, right? And he pauses, right? Another bait. I wait, right? And you didn't watch the presentation, so now he's going to have to say it again. Patronizing. Another bait. What do I say? Nothing, right? And it goes on like that. I don't know. You can find however many more instances when you just listen to that like little bit again. And it's just me. It's just an example of me. Like, again, I don't care what Sam has to say. I don't. Right? I just want to get back to the conversation with David. So I'm going to wait until David starts talking again, and then we're going to move forward. And then finally, in the end, he gives another pause, and I hear David start talking again. And so I can give my little counter shot, and my counter shot, it's not much, but it's enough, right? And all I say is, yep, thanks, Sam. Go ahead, David. And just make it clear to him that none of what he said mattered to me at all. So let's go back. Let's watch that clip again. I'm gonna like copy it and put it right after this so that we can watch it again after having heard the commentary.
Okay, can you see my screen? The slide I got up.
Yeah, hold on real quick. Mr. Anderson, you realized I was asked to join the stream to help mod, and if you're going to be uncharitable because you're pressed for time, perhaps you ought to consider coming back when you have more time. So
I appreciate your input, Sam, but it's not necessary. Thank you,
Mr. Anderson. Calm down. So we're gonna be patient with each other and not so demanding. Okay, David's taking his time to put together this nice presentation. And you didn't watch any of it, so he's going to be redundant. So you're going to be patient, okay?
Okay.
Thank you, Sam. Go ahead, David.
Can you see the slide that's on my screen?
I can see it now. Yep.
Okay. So if you look at the heat capacity for Earth's oceans, that says that you need 5.58 yotajoules to increase the ocean's temperature by 1 degree C. That's my calculation.
Mm-hmm.
So a yotajoule is 10 to the 24th.
Okay. So 100 degrees would boil the ocean. So that means that 2 orders of magnitude. So 24, 25, 26. So somewhere in the 10 to the 26th is going to boil the oceans, right?
Okay. So it would be 5.58 times 10 to the 26 would be enough heat to increase the ocean's temperature by 100 degrees centigrade if it's deposited instantaneously.
Right. And the oceans are already about, 20 degrees centigrade? No, less than that. 10, 15 degrees centigrade. So let's just call it 100. So 10 to the 26 will boil the oceans. Is that fair?
If it's deposited instantaneously, it will increase the temperature to 100 degrees centigrade. It wouldn't boil it for reasons I'm not going to get into, but it would increase it by 100 degrees centigrade. So it would increase it to the temperature that water boils at atmospheric pressure.
So he's actually right about this because I was curious and I looked it up. And the reason is that, remember that the boiling point of water depends on the pressure. And so you could actually get water at the bottom of the ocean to probably quite a bit hotter than 100 degrees Celsius before that part of the ocean started to boil, because it won't turn into a gas because it's being squished together by the weight of all the water above it. So that part of the ocean actually probably could get hotter, but I mean, it doesn't really matter because it would still kill everything in the ocean. So I think, look, 100 degrees Celsius is gonna do it anyways.
Okay, and that's why you're saying 10 to the 27th to just give yourself some wiggle room, because over 100 years it's still gonna do it. Is that right?
No, I'm saying the climate can handle approximately 10 to the 27, and I don't know the exact number without detailed climate modeling.
That's fine.
Okay.
No, that's fine, David. That's
10
fine.
to the 27 over several hundred years without increasing ocean temperatures by more than about 15 degrees centigrade, because it's happening slowly.
Okay.
I think here the reason that David is being so cagey about, look, I need my detailed climate modeling and stuff like that is that it's probably the case that if you raise the entire ocean's temperatures by 15 degrees for several hundred years, that's going to have some pretty significant knock-on effects on the climate, and that's probably not going to be something that's survivable by species, by anything, especially if it, just started to happen one day. But as you'll see, like, that doesn't really matter from my perspective, and that's why I'm kind of like, look, calm down about that stuff. Like, I don't care. If you say that you can handle 10 to the 27, fine, right? Because that's not the direction that we're going in. We're going in quite a different direction, as you'll soon see.
And according to AIG, they're estimating that just the heat from the magma that has to come up and harden to create new crust in order for the continents to move from where they were to where they are is about 10 to the 29. Does that sound right to you?
I believe Worker said 1.4 times 10 to the 29. So that sounds right. I don't know if that's
So that would
he did
boil
publish an
about
AIG, so
100
yes,
oceans,
sounds
right?
Oh, I'm
What
just going to
now?
jump in because a little bit of crosstalk there, which is okay. That's a healthy discussion. But for the audience sake, I just really want to make sure that they're hearing both sides. So, David, finish your thoughts, and then Mr. Anderson, we'll throw it right back to you, my good man.
Now, this is something that Donnie does, which really irritates me, is that every single time he interrupts whenever, he's saying that there's some crosstalk. Like, number one, look, I know how to create a transcript, and in the event that there's crosstalk, I'm typically going to slow down, back up, make sure that I ask a clear question, and that, my witness or my interlocutor in this case gives a clear answer. So he doesn't need to do that in the first place. Secondly, not helpful because it's not responsive to a question for him to throw to the person who's doing the answering without giving me an opportunity to repeat the question so that we're getting a clear transcript, right? Because nobody remembers what the question is. But what it does do is it allows that person to, try and change the topic, which is something that people typically will often do. So, I mean, that's just a little irritant, but I mean, it's not the end of the world. You just got to kind of roll with the punches. You got to play the cards, you're dealt, right?
Oh,
Okay,
sorry, I didn't say. Go ahead, Mr. Go ahead, Dave. I didn't mean to.
Okay.
I don't think I was talking.
I continue your point because I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay, we can start with you,
No,
Mr. Anderson. If you
Thank you very much.
another question.
No,
Okay,
don't
I
worry
will
about it,
continue.
Donnie. My question was this. So it 10 to the 29, which was the estimate from AIG as to how much heat is created just from catastrophic plate tech, just from the basaltic, the seafloor spreading. That would boil the oceans about 100 times over, right? If it was done all at once.
If you can find a way to explain how that heat gets into the ocean across the seafloor, yes.
So now I haven't watched his presentation and I don't know what he's talking about. And I mean, this is a good moment for him, right? Because that does sound like a responsive, answer. And like it's new information to me, right? So I'm kind of rocked on my heels here. So you can see what I do is I take a moment to think and I kind of reset, and we go out. We go kind of basically we do what I call going around again, so we can get to the point that I want to talk about. And while that's happening, I'm kind of trying to digest what he said, so that I can kind of understand it and I can make sure that that I attack it in the right way. So I'm kind of doing two things at once here. So you'll see sort of I kind of stop, I reset, I go around to try and make the point that I want to make and lead him down the path that I want. And at the same time, I'm trying to figure out, like, what is he talking about? What is this thing that he just said?
What do you mean by,
Yeah, because I talked about heat transfer. And I'm saying that it's very hard to get that heat across the seafloor into the oceans. That's kind of my whole point.
so you said that they can handle about 10 to the 27 joules without the ocean getting 15 degrees hotter Sorry, let me. I see where I've gone wrong now. You're saying, look, I can dissipate about 10 to the 27 joules worth of heat over a couple of hundred years in a way that's not going to kill everything in the ocean, because you
Well,
can't
more
get
like
too hot in
1,000
the
years,
ocean.
but
Never
yes.
mind boiling it. You can't get too hot or all the fish will die. Is that right?
Well, you can't even cause heat stroke to the people that live on land. I mean, you have too much global warming and you get a heat wave and everybody dies.
Okay. But the point is that 10 to the 27 over that period of time you're talking about is the maximum that your model can handle, right?
Give or take, yeah. And climate
Okay.
modeling will give us a more exact number. Correct.
Okay. And according to AIG, the estimate of the amount of heat that you need to dissipate just for the CPT stuff is about 100 times that, right?
That's what Walker says, and the
Okay.
CPT model needs to be revised because that's not
Right.
going to work.
Okay. So what you're saying is that you solved about 1% of the heat problem if we take AIG's numbers.
Yeah, or another way of saying it is, yeah, I mean, I suppose you could look at it that way.
And so there you can see the power of just sort of going around again. So the first time he kind of tried to take me down, or he did take me down this kind of side path, and I was like, what are you talking about with the heat transfer and stuff, right? Because the heat transfer thing, like, you know, we're going to get into it some more, and you know, once I understand it, it's not really it's not a defeater to the point. But then we would just simply go around again. You know, when we start with the same basics and we establish them, and then we move forward and we go, you know, look, so you can dissipate this amount. You need to dissipate about 100 times that amount. So you're able to dissipate 1%, right? And you know, when he has a second look at it, he goes, yeah, I guess that's basically right. And I mean, that's the admission I'm looking for, because, like, you know, what that means then is that you haven't solved the heat problem, right? You've solved 1% of the heat problem. So, you know, game set, right?
Okay. All right. And so you said you weren't sure about the amount of heat that CPT would generate. We've got the 10 to the 29th number. Is there any other number that you wanted to talk about that you think is maybe a better representation of the amount of
Yeah,
heat that
you
would be
know, there's
generated?
something.
So the point here, and we're going to get into it some more, is that so I have one set of numbers from, you know, an established, uh, you know, young Earth creationist like organization, one of the more prestigious ones, that says that you need this, you need 100 times what he's got. And so I'm like, okay, well, you're saying, well, that's not the only number. So now I don't want him to like kind of go back and be like, oh, you know, well, there's lots of other numbers, and that's just one of them. I want to pin him down, and I want to make him, you know, like, it's like, if you've got other numbers, if you got better numbers, like, you know, this is your presentation. You should be ready. Show them to me. Show them to me right now. I'm putting him on the spot, because I don't think he has any other numbers, right? And if he does, then, you know, we can talk about those. So, so that's what's kind of going on here, and I want that answer.
There's
Generated?
something I probably should have mentioned because I can see this is getting confusing. So, if I remember correctly, 1 million cubic kilometers of rock at 2 megajoules per cubic meter heat capacity times 500 degrees centigrade is equal to 1 yottajoule. So you could, you could cool 1,000 million cubic kilometers of rock by 500 degrees centigrade and dump that heat into the ocean before you have a problem. That would be about the magnitude of what could be done.
So, pop quiz for you as an audience. Number one, did you understand any of that? And number two, did that have anything at all to do with the question that I asked him? Because I think, you know, like, pause your videos and see what the answer to that is. But for me, the answer was no to both, right? Not that didn't have a thing to do with, you know, do you have any other models? And also, like, it didn't seem to have any kind of relevance or meaning to, you know, to what I was saying. And also, I mean, I didn't really understand, you know, like what it is that he's trying to say, what the point is. So, you can get mean in that situation and just kind of be like, what are you talking about, right? But I kind of try and play it off a little bit as a joke, and try and let him pretend that he's being smart. He's always obviously trying to sound smart, so kind of let him do that, but sort of also guide him back to, like, dude, we're supposed to be having a conversation about something, and you're not right now.
I have no idea what you just I understood all the words that you said, but I don't know what they mean.
Oh,
And I
okay.
don't know
Okay.
why you
There's
said
a
it.
limit to the amount. There's a limit to the volume of igneous rock, or not igneous, whatever. There's a limit to the volume of rock
It's
that can be
igneous.
cooled.
I don't know why he's resistant to admitting that it's igneous rock. Like, it clearly is, right? Rock that came from the mantle that, solidified at the bottom of the ocean and formed new seafloor is clearly igneous rock. It's basaltic igneous rock. So, like, we know that, but he doesn't want to call it igneous rock. I think maybe because he doesn't want to admit that it is rock now and that it has lost all of its heat. I think that's what's going on. Is he wants to pretend that there's still molten material in the crust, which we know there isn't. But we'll get to that.
Whether it's igneous or not, or what we'll call it former mantle material. There's a limit to the amount of former mantle material, rock layers, whatever it is, that can be cooled and that can be discharged to the ocean before it's problematic. And any CPT model can't exceed that amount of heat removal.
Right. Are you aware of a CPT model that does not exceed that amount of heat?
And so you can see, despite his effort to sort of take us down this path to doing a bunch of math that doesn't matter, I just lead him right back to, look, that's what I want to know is, are you aware of a CPT model that produces an amount of heat that you can deal with, right? Because if you're not, then you have not solved the heat problem, kind of, period.
I'm not sure as far as, I think a lot of the models, they don't necessarily say. Here's another problem. A lot of this, like Worker's
Okay, well,
paper.
let's not get off track.
So this was a pretty kind of standard non-responsive answer to the question, right? Are you aware of any CPT models that produce an amount of heat that you can dissipate? And his response is, well, here's another problem. So he wants to change the subject. And so now what I'm doing is I'm going to interrupt him. I'm cutting him off, and I'm going to say, like, no, that's not my question. My question was, and I'm going to restate the question, and that is one of the most basic and fundamental ways to make sure your question gets answered. If they don't answer it, stop them, ask it again.
So,
Yeah, we're gonna let
of
him
the
answer
ones that
we're
do
gonna let him
say,
answer the question.
Sam,
Anderson,
you know what?
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in.
Do this,
I'm going to
Mike.
jump.
We're doing fine.
Anderson, yeah,
I'm going to
thank
jump
you.
in because I will
He's
say,
emotional. He gets a
Mr.
little
Anderson,
crazy
I do want you to respect my co-host and moderator tonight. I know you and Sam, you got a bit of a history. You guys have been going at it, but Sam's in moderator mode. Secondly, there is a bit of a delay on your end, though, Mr. Anderson. You cut out here and there, and so I think that's why there tends to be a little bit of crosstalk. But it's been a great discussion so far. So, David, finish your thoughts, and then Mr. Anderson, we're going to throw it right back to you.
Okay.
So I did cut out there, and I don't know why I think I was in my basement here, so that's why my Wi-Fi wasn't the best when I was trying to do this. But the point is, at some point I said, and it cuts out, but I said, Donnie, mute his mic, because, like, this is not a valuable interruption, right? He quite clearly didn't answer the question. I was cutting him off because he needs to answer the question. And then Sam's going, well, you're going to let him finish. What, I'm going to let him finish with a diversion onto another topic? Of course I'm not going to do that. And then, Donnie comes in, and he's like, actually, no, we're going to throw it to him. And then we're going to throw it right back to you, my man. Like, okay, look, guys, you're just facilitating the diversion, facilitating the dodge of, a pretty fair, pretty basic question. So those are examples of inappropriate interferences with the cross-examination. But we'll see how we deal with it here.
Okay, so here's the issue with Walker stuff is he's thinking that we need to cool 95-kilometer depth. Unless we have some proof that 50 kilometers beneath the ocean, it was hot and now it's cold. We don't really need to get rid of that heat unless you can prove that. That's really an area for geophysics, which is not my area of expertise. But I think a legitimate question could be raised as to, was all this material hot and did it actually cool? And I believe that if you were to drill in the ground deeper than you've ever drilled, you're going to find higher temperatures than what you expect from a secular perspective. That's my opinion.
In this whole debate, because if you've watched any of my videos, then you know that I'm always harping on about stay on target, right? You've got a plan, you've got a a point you want to make, like don't let it go. Make sure they answer that question, So if you guys were listening to that, what you're probably expecting is for me to go, it's very interesting, sir. That doesn't answer my question. My question was, are you aware of any CPT models that do an amount that generate an amount of heat that you can deal with? Yes or no, right? But that's not what I do, because there is another kind of mantra that you need to keep in mind when you're doing this sort of stuff, is that you have to listen. You always have to listen, and sometimes you got to follow the white rabbit. You got to, when somebody says something interesting, sometimes that's off topic, sometimes you need to chase that. You follow the white rabbit. You keep going, and you start asking about that, because every once in a while following that white rabbit can lead you to wonderland. And so that's what I decided to do here.
Okay. Do you have anything to back that up, or is that just an opinion that you just
That's
happen to
just
hold?
an opinion. That's just an
Okay,
opinion.
so it's got no basis in science or fact. It's just something that you hope to be true.
It's based on my work and realization that there's really only so much heat that can be removed during catastrophic plate tectonics, and so I believe a lot of it's still in the ground.
Okay, so the only reason that you believe that heat is still in the ground is because you don't have a way to dissipate it.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
very astute statement.
Okay. Okay. Wow, I didn't expect to get that from you. Okay.
My friends, welcome to Wonderland. So that was an admission that I did not have on my radar, that I had no idea that he was going to say something like that. And it's devastating for him. And it was something that, like, he brought it up, right? And all I needed to do was to just keep asking questions about it and just kind of follow him down. And then he says something which is, like, rhetorically pretty bad, pretty devastating for his case. And that's why we listen, right? That's why, like, I had a plan, right? I had things that I wanted to get out of him. But you always have to be aware. You always have to be prepared to just kind of take the plan, rip it up, throw it in the air, and follow the person, see where they're going to go.
So you don't have any reason, or sorry, let me put it this way. So before we were interrupted by Sam, what I was asking you was, or what we were talking about was, you said, well, there's different heat models, and I'm not sure that they all have values. And the question that I was asking you was, with respect to the models that do have heat values, are you aware of any other ones that produce an amount of heat which is small enough to be dealt with by your model?
Oh, you poor bastard. Did you think that I was going to forget about the point that I was making before? No. No, I'm going to crucify you on that too now.
I think you're making a very good point in that, you could probably do an analysis of different CPT models, figure out how much heat would be generated, where that heat would go, and then kind of go back and forth and kind of figure out how that fits into it and whether or not some of these models need to be scaled back because they just do produce too much heat. Not that it would cause Noah and his family a problem, but just all that rock should have cooled and it's not cooled. So, I think that's a fruitful exercise that could be done. One of the problems I have with that is kind of like trying to decide which model to evaluate. Maybe I could randomly pick one.
Yeah, or you could pick any one, or maybe you could do a range, right? You could find the highest, the lowest. It seems like they all do, the one that we know about does 100 times what you can handle. So, I'm asking you, all right, well, that one doesn't work. Do you have any that you can handle? What's your best case, right? We don't know what your worst case is. We know this one's pretty bad. What's your best case? Do you have anything, right? And he goes, well, I haven't really looked that hard. Well, I think maybe we know why that is.
The other thing being is it's also a problem of being somewhat subjective because the modeler could probably tell me what temperatures he thinks are affiliated with his model, but they may not show that. They may just show how the rock moves, but they would probably have that information. The real question is what temperature is that now? If the heat, if the heat can't escape and there's a lot of magma that should be there that isn't because we send seismic waves through it and the seismic waves go through area that should be liquid, then that's a problem with that model.
So he just kind of breezes by that, and I don't stop him, but we're stopping him now. Yeah, that is a pretty big problem because if your mantle only, or if your crust only cools by 1% of what it needs to in order to be solid rock, then it won't be solid rock, right? It'll still be liquid. And we can tell it's not liquid because we send seismic waves through it, and seismic waves move differently through liquid than they do through solid rock. So we know it's solid rock. So, that heat can't still be in there, which is a pretty big problem for your solution here.
I guess it's a little bit more subjective in, maybe that's something I should look into.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, I welcome you to look into that. But the question that I asked you was, are you aware of any models of CPT that generate less heat than the amount of heat that you can deal with? I think the answer to that question is that you're not aware of any, though there may be some out there. Is that a fair characterization of what you've said?
Yes, it's fair, but with a caveat that I don't necessarily couldn't tell you whether the ones that have more heat, other than I know that, a few instances like Walker had an idea that had, 1.4 times 10 to the 29 joules, but as a general rule, I don't necessarily know whether or not the model has more or less heat than what I think can be dissipated by climate.
So the technique here is that I've asked him this question like 3 times at least, are you aware of any model? And so I finally just say look, I asked you this question, and I think based on kind of what I'm hearing that the answer is no, I am not aware of any. Is that true? Right? And that's called a leading question, where you just put the answer in the question and ask them whether or not it's correct. Because otherwise, we're just going to go around and around and around forever with him, not sort of really firmly committing to the answer. And you can see, even here, his answer is just a kind of a ramble. But if this was a trial, right, and I was doing read-ins from a discovery, then I would just stop at yes, that is true, and I would just cut the rest of it, right? Because that's the part that matters.
Well, okay. To be clear, we know that Wars has more heat than you think can be dissipated by about 100-fold, right?
Wait a second. I think Ward is dealing with heat removal, not a model specifically, if I remember correctly. I don't think he actually has his own CPT model. He's just evaluating the models of others, or evaluating the
Fair
heat.
enough. Regardless, it's still for his. So the one that we know of, the number that we haven't solved the heat problem. Is that fair? We have unsolve the heat problem if we use Warwick's numbers for the heat that we need to solve the problem.
Okay, I would say that the heat that he is proposing cannot be mitigated by climate,
Okay.
by dissipating via climate through radiation.
Okay. And there's no other model, CT model, which generates heat that you're aware of, that you have numbers for, that your model could dissipate the heat for, right?
Well, I guess that's correct. Yes.
Okay.
So, and you can see here what's happening is that even though I kind of got that admission before and I could have done it as a read-in, I wanted it clearer, right? I wanted more. And so I went around again and got a nice, clear, clean admission. And now I'm done.
All right. Thanks.
I think pretty much said that.
Yeah, I think that's it for me, Donnie.
Donnie's response to this is unbeatable.
Okay, Mr. Anderson, that was good.
So hearty thank you to Mr. Anderson for getting all those little sound bites for us. That's lovely. I wasn't expecting any of that to happen, and the stream exceeded my wildest dreams in that light.
And by that token, thank you very much, Erica, for covering this. By the way, all of those clips are from a video of Erica's that is Gutsy Gibbons, and I'm going to link her channel in the description. And you know, as I say, if you're not already subscribed to Erica's channel, like, she's fantastic. You know, like, stop whatever you're doing, pull the car over, subscribe to that channel immediately. You won't regret it. But all of that having been said, guys, I think that is now it for me with respect to this video as well. And thanks very much for watching. And I hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you next time.